We know that in the Torah or in the Tanakh, the name Yeshua does not appear as such. Jesus is how it was rendered in Latin because that name has no meaning in either Latin or Greek. We know that Jesus in Hebrew means horse. So what do you make of Yeshua, as we often call him today?
Well, the name Yeshua does appear in the Hebrew Bible. It appears in the book of Ezra and in the book of 2nd Chronicles. The name Yeshua is a verb that means, or rather, it comes from a verb that means salvation, which is to save. The name Jesus in Greek is the form used by the authors of the Septuagint, which is the Greek text, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. That's how they translated the name Joshua. And also the name Yeshua, which appears in these sections of Ezra, they used it for both. So the name Yeshua, I think it should be pronounced Yeshu and not Yeshua, because Jesus, let's call him Jesus so the audience understands. Because that's the name given to him in Spanish, although you're right, Jesus in Hebrew means horse, but in Spanish for our audience. Jesus was a person who lived in Galilee, his family was in Galilee, and in Galilee the Galileans didn't pronounce the letter Ain. The name Yeshua has the letter Ain at the end, and the Galileans didn't pronounce it. The difference between the Jaf and the Jet, which are guttural letters, that's what these guttural letters are called because they're in the throat, okay? That's why the name Yeshua was unpronounceable for a Galilean, and that's why they said Yeshu. That's how a Galilean would pronounce it. So I believe that historically, and that's all I'm saying. In fact, this is research already done by Dr. David Flusser, who was one of the great scholars on the subject of Jesus in the time of the Second Temple and all of that. But most likely, Jesus' relatives called Jesus by his name in Hebrew, Yeshu. I think that's why the correct thing is to call Jesus Yeshu.
I mean, let me explain. Yeshu by itself couldn't mean salvation because to say salvation, you say Yeshua, because if we say Yeshu, you're right. The root of this word is yasa, which means to save. Yes.
It's true that if you pronounce the letter Ain at the end, that's actually how it should be said. But if you were a Galilean living in Jesus' neighborhood, growing up with him as a child, you would call him Yeshu because that's how Galileans spoke. They didn't pronounce the letter Ain, they didn't say it, so in the Galilean pronunciation it wasn't said that way. The most accurate thing, I think, historically and linguistically, is that if someone wants to call Jesus the way his family did, if they lived in Galilee, it would be Yeshu. And it's true, as I explained to you, that the name comes from the word for salvation, which does have an Ain at the end. That's correct. However, the Galilean pronunciation is without the Ain, so the final A is omitted.
Does eternal damnation exist in Jewish philosophy or in the Hebrew Bible? Is there such a thing as eternal damnation?
No, what exists is a concept called Gehinom, which is mistranslated like hell, but I think it's more similar to what is known as purgatory. In our tradition, it's that every human being has committed a sin, everyone commits sins. It's written in the Bible itself in Ecclesiastes. I think 720, I don't remember. But the point is that if a human being does something wrong, there are, let's call them metaphorically, stains on the soul. And now the soul has to be cleansed so that it can arrive pure in Eden, like this waiting place until there is a future resurrection. And what happens? In order for the soul to be purified, you have to, I'm going to speak in somewhat childish terms, but it's metaphorical so I can make myself understood. You have to subject the soul to very high heat, just like you purify a metal. You put it under very high temperatures and the impurities go away. So it's the same. Let's say you put the soul in, let's say, an oven, I don't know, very hot, so that these impurities or impure things of the soul are removed. That place where these purifications happen, like this soul washing machine, is called Gehinom. And the human being is in Gehinom for a few months. That's it. If they're there, I don't know, 11 months, 12 months, those are the most wicked ones. And then he goes to this one, to Eden, which is like a waiting place until human beings are resurrected. Now, in the Talmud, there's a discussion that there are certain sins that leave you trapped in Gehinom forever. There's also a midrash that mentions this. I think it's cited by Bahya ibn Pakuda. Well, Rabbeinu Behei brings it up regarding those whom the earth swallowed with Korach. There's a scene in the book of Numbers where there was a rebel against Moses named Kore in Spanish, and the earth swallowed him up. And so he and all his followers are trapped in a section of Gehinom for all eternity. But those are specific cases. But as a rule, Judaism does not assume that you will be condemned forever. When there is a resurrection, the most wicked, and this comes from the book of Isaiah, those who were truly catastrophically evil, like for example, Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas. They will be revived with worms. In other words, their bodies will return with worms made of fire. The worms are in flames. So what is this? What does it mean? How is that? There will be bodies of people in the street in this messianic world, this perfect world, and people who have worms of fire in their bodies. The point here is that the people who did wrong will be remembered as bad. That's the point. And that is truly an eternal punishment. Not necessarily physically, but rather conceptually, if a person harmed the world. For example, I don't know, Stalin in World War II or all of that. If they harm the world, when the world becomes that future world of harmony and peace, we will remember these ultra evil people throughout history, and that's like having worms of fire. Do you understand me? Those are the stains people left on themselves, and that's why that really is an eternal condemnation that people have because of the bad decisions they made. Did you understand?
Just one last thing. You know what really gets my attention? That when they asked John the Baptist if he was a prophet or if he was Elijah, he completely denied that. But we see that when they asked Jesus about Elijah, he gives a kind of parable, sort of implying that John the Baptist was Elijah. What do you think about that?
I think there's a contradiction. What you just said is one. It's in the Synoptic Gospels versus John. Wait. Sorry. John, chapter 1, verse 21, something like that. That's where John denies that he is the prophet. He denies that he is the Messiah. And he denies that he is Elijah and all that. And there are several contradictions in that chapter, like John not knowing Jesus versus actually knowing Jesus. So these are two traditions that ended up in different gospels, and that's why the New Testament contradicts itself in this aspect. That's how I see it. I don't think it's something very dramatic. Of course, I don't believe that John the Baptist was Elijah, simply because Elijah is alive. Elijah didn't die to become another person named John. Am I clear? Elijah was taken to heaven alive. And what the Jewish tradition says is that Elijah appears in different generations sometimes, and he appears, but he's not John. John is someone else. Elijah appears in Jewish literature. He appears momentarily, talks with someone, and then leaves. But John, we know, is a person who historically apparently existed. And no, he was not Elijah. That's how I saw it, and he certainly wasn't a prophet either. Well, basically, that's it. I mean, they are...
In plain words, they're inventions to reshape the stories of Jesus so that people believe more in their truthfulness.
What I believe is that, look, there's a prophecy from the prophet Malachi. Malachi, which is the last chapter of Malachi. Chapter 3. Christianity cut this chapter in half on purpose. For theological reasons, they made chapters 3 and 4, but in reality, it's the same chapter. And there it says, the prophet Malachi ends by saying, and here I am sending you Elijah. It says, look, this is the great and terrible day when I am sending you the prophet Elijah. For what? To turn the heart of the fathers to the children and the heart of the children to their fathers, That is to say, in the Jewish tradition, we say that the one who announces the coming of the Messiah is Elijah. Elijah announces the arrival of the Messiah. That's why Christianity needed this device in their texts. To bring in Elijah who says that is, if we Jews are waiting for Elijah to announce the Messiah, Christianity, since they say the Messiah has already come, needs an Elijah to say this. And since John, imagine that he baptized Jesus. He placed him in the water, saying it was a ritual for sinners and such. That means it's assumed that Jesus had sins. Interesting, I don't know. But the point is that Christianity took advantage of the fact that there was a man named John who baptized a man named Jesus. And they said, well, let's identify him as Elijah, and that's how they made it fit Malachi's words. That's more or less how I think the narrative went, at least the development of how the character is presented. It's basically so that it fits with Malachi. Well, now that's it. I send you my regards.
Just to finish, did you know that according to Christians, we who are waiting for the Messiah, that is the son of David, who comes from the paternal lineage of David, or through a converted mother, they say that we are waiting for the Antichrist.
Yes, obviously. And it's interesting because if you read what is supposed to be the Antichrist, it's everything that literally says the Messiah is going to be. For example, it is written that the Messiah is going to rebuild the temple. But they are going to tell you, no, the third temple is going to be built by the Antichrist. That's how it seems to me. It is written that the Messiah is going to bring peace. They'll say the Antichrist will bring false peace. So all the characteristics of the Messiah. They had to define him as an Antichrist because for them the Messiah has already come. And it can't be that a true Messiah is going to come, so they have to label him as an Antichrist. But such a radical example. There was a fake news story like 3 years ago about a rabbi who knows a lot here in Israel. They started this whole story that he was the Messiah and that here in Israel we are crowning the Messiah. And then the Christian community came out, the Messianic groups, all these groups. They started saying that we Jews are crowning the Antichrist. Why? They didn't even know what's really happening. They didn't even know who this person is, what he has done, what he hasn't done. But still, he's the Antichrist. Why? Just because. So they're always expecting an Antichrist. Any belief that doesn't fit in, it's an Antichrist. I don't know. Everything. And I'll give you a fun fact, just as a way to say goodbye. Jesus tells his disciples, yes, look, all these predictions and stories I tell you about the end of the world, yes, these things happen, then someone else comes and claims to be Jesus, the Messiah. Know that he is an Antichrist. And well, Jesus died, none of that happened. And then Paul, in Acts of the Apostles, it says that, I don't know, he had an epileptic seizure, I don't know, he was approaching a horse and he has a vision where Jesus appears to him. So what can I conclude? Maybe Paul saw this Antichrist. Because if Jesus said that the next one who claims to be Jesus, he will be an Antichrist if these signs haven't appeared. And Paul claims that he had an encounter with Jesus. It means that if Jesus is right, Paul saw the Antichrist. Or if Paul is right and he saw Jesus, it means that Jesus was wrong about when he would appear before seeing all these signs. So it's just an interesting fact how it contradicts itself. Let's say that's the narrative in these texts. Now then, I send you my regards. All the best. Wishing you happiness.